Friends and family members ask me all the time if I use Duolingo to learn language. In fact, my understanding is that a whole ton of you guys use gamified apps like this one. And yeah, I get it. It's cool to check up on your progress. You can compete with your friends and your coworkers and whatever. But the thing is that there are a lot of problems with this kind of approach. And the thing is that these are the sort of problems you're not going to really realize that you're running into them, at least not when you first start using this program. Now, I know that there's been a big push over the years against Duolingo, in particular because of the company's excessive use of AI, all this stuff about firing actual workers to replace them with AI. That's a red flag. That's not a cool thing. But as far as I'm concerned, the bigger red flag here is that combination of gamified content and this design that's intended to work with every single language in the world. The thing is that language learning just doesn't work like that. It's not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. And I'll tell you how I know. So a long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away known as Eastern Canada, I bought into this program. This is Fluenz French, founded by Sonia Gill, and I bought into the advertising right away. And seriously, this kind of advertising looks pretty good, doesn't it? The problem that I discovered is that Fluenz is just like all of the other generic language teaching companies that are out there. And I didn't realize that until I had already spent big money on the software. I'm talking a couple $100s, right? Because there's not really that much you can do as a trial lesson or something. You pay your money for it, and then you're like, why did I just do that? Back then, I guess it's changed since. Back then, it came with a bunch of discs with MP3 files on them. I guess I could listen to that when I was working out, but the quality wasn't that good. It was mostly in English with a little bit of French, right? And then there was also the crappy computer software to present the lessons to you. I mean, it's not that it was horrible, right? But there was nobody there to listen to my pronunciation, to have a conversation with me. There was nothing interactive. Now, Duolingo at least is somewhat interactive. That would have been more fun. Fluenz certainly was not worth the hundreds of dollars that I put into it. I switched over to Glossika a year later. This is back when you still had to order the textbook and the CDs. At the time, Glossika was the only company that offered Taiwanese Hokkien. When they switched to the web interface, I eventually bought in. In fact, at one point, I had a plan to study dozens of these languages through Glossika. In fact, to this day, I've still got Anki cards that come originally from Glossika sentences. But the thing is that all of these companies, so Duolingo, Fluenz, Glossika, Rosetta Stone, Babbel, Pimsleur, and whatever else is out there, these are all basically the same thing, the same idea, and they all have very similar flaws. The problem is that all of these are attempts, like I said, to make a one-size-fits-all approach to teaching language. You can't do that because not all languages play by the same rules. In other words, in a sense, these are all scams. Now, by scam, I don't mean that they take your money and give you nothing in return. Instead, what I mean is that it's not worth it and you get a lot of stupid bugs like this one. And then you get situations like this where it's impossible to get the right answer because everything is so context dependent. As this Redditor correctly says, the problem here is that they basically dumped a list of vocab words into the program with no context. And don't just kid yourself into believing that things are magically going to be all right. So back in the days when I started learning Korean at the Foreign Service Institute, the teachers asked each of us if any of us had used Rosetta Stone before. Now the reason why is not because we were going to use that software, though I know that that's what Rosetta Stone at least used to advertise. No, the reason is because they would need to correct the bad habits that you picked up from Rosetta Stone if you decided to go that way in learning the language. And the reason why is because in Korean, there are, like in every other language, different registers to the sort of words that you use, but the idiots at Rosetta Stone back then didn't really realize that and kind of dumped, vocabulary lists into the software for whatever reason. Anyway, I'm going to show you here how I would approach learning a brand new language from scratch. This is a method that does not involve spending money on garbage apps that are designed to make you feel like you're accomplishing something instead of actually teaching you. Okay, for the sake of this exercise, I'm going to assume that you want to learn Korean. Now, you want to learn Korean because you got great dramas, handsome men, beautiful women. The attraction to the language is pretty obvious. Plus, you've got a complex and confusing grammar, which means that you never get bored. Of course, the thing is, language learning is about more than just watching TV and watching some movies. Otherwise, it would be really easy to do, right? But you do need to do this in your target language. You need to watch television, you need to watch movies, and you're best off if you start doing that from the start. Now, I know I've talked with a lot of you about that. There are people who kind of don't believe this or think that, I'm making it up or whatever. I'm telling you this because I'm always reluctant to do this, but you need to do it. You need to get a good feel for the natural ebbs and flows of the language, including the way that people talk to each other, including the rhythm of the language and stuff like that. Like, if you don't have a good feel for that, you're always going to sound like you're a foreigner. You're always going to sound like an outsider. You need to know how the people who speak the language natively actually speak. Now, to begin with, I would recommend using an actual Korean textbook or a program designed for beginners. Integrated Korean is kind of old, but it still works as well as ever. And I mean, you could use something dedicated like Talk to Me in Korean if you really wanted to, I suppose. In my opinion, though, you're probably better off paying a one-time fee for a textbook, especially a used textbook, instead of a subscription plan through a website. So I've gone through Talk to Me in Korean before. I actually spent money on their program a couple years back. There's a lot of good stuff there, yeah, and the voices, of course, are great. I mean, every voice actor that they use is really, really good. But the problem with the lessons that Talk to Me in Korean is that there's just tons and tons of filler in them. There's way too much English, way too much sitting there and explaining things to you, especially at like the intermediate or advanced levels, right? Now, this is likely done this way to ensure that you remain subscribed to the service, because then you can have a whole bunch of lessons that teach you one thing instead of lessons that are sort of more complete that will teach you multiple things. That's the sort of class that I had at the Foreign Service Institute. Now, Talk to Me in Korean is a good substitute, or is a fairly good program, but it costs money, and there actually is a really good substitute out there that is free that will give you the same grammar and vocabulary lessons. In fact, I think it's a little bit better. Once you've gotten through to about the intermediate level of integrated Korean, you should consider adding on stuff from How to Study Korean. The grammar and vocabulary lessons here are just as good as Talk to Me in Korean, if not better, and there is free native speaker audio. If you want, you can also buy the content as Anki decks, though I honestly don't recommend doing that. And see, this is where Anki comes in. So see, if you're learning a language, the best thing to do is to create your own Anki deck as you go along. Now, I'm talking about creating a deck that's designed to do whatever it is you want to do in the language, right? I've talked with you guys about this before for my Chinese deck, I guess you could call it. Like, I've got myself writing characters by hand. I've got myself typing in characters. You don't have to do that. I recommend it, but maybe you don't want to do it. Maybe you want to do something else, right? The thing is that the process of creating your own cards, figuring out what you want to learn, what you want to memorize, and figuring out how you want to do that is a very, very important part of the language or language learning process. The reason why is because you've got to think about how you're learning the language and what would be most beneficial for you. And sure, in the beginning, you're probably going to want to learn as many example sentences, phrases, and words as you possibly can. Remember, however, that you don't need to learn everything. At some point, you're going to have to ask yourself if this particular phrase is actually helpful. So I'll give you some advice here. More advice from me, right? You only want to learn sentences and phrases that have at most like one word that you don't understand. This is advice coming from somebody who's stubbornly done it the other way for years and years and years. The problem is that if you run across a sentence you stuck in your deck where you don't know what's going on, and you're thinking when you made it like, oh, I'll figure this out later on, right? When you come across it when you're doing Anki, you're not like, oh, you know what, let me spend 20 minutes to figure this out. You don't even want to like go over to like ChatGPT and say like, hey, help me with this, I don't get it, right? Like, it is kind of helpful if you do something like that, but you don't want to be spending your Anki time doing stuff like that. You don't. You need to know beforehand what it means. That's what's going to make Anki work the best for you. If you're learning, say, like Japanese, and you have a sentence come up and it's got kanji and you don't know how to say the kanji, you haven't learned this word yet, and there's multiple words like that, you're really going to be in trouble because you're not going to be able to remember it when the sentence comes up over and over and over again. This is how you get so-called leeches in Anki, and this is how your Anki study starts lasting several hours instead of like an hour or less, which is what it should be, right? If there's too much in these sentences you don't understand, you also run the risk of giving up, of just skipping through it, and of rendering Anki totally useless. You see, the thing about a program like Anki, and I know that the other algorithm programs are the same, is that if you really want it to work right for you, you have to go through everyday study honestly. That means if you don't know it, you have to push that you don't know it. You can't push I know it and then lie to yourself. It's going to make it worse. So Anki comes with this thing called FSRS, or Free Spaced Repetition Scheduler, built in, and you want to use it. Basically, FSRS helps Anki figure out how to accurately schedule your cards based on a prediction of when you're most likely to forget them. But the thing is that FSRS uses your answer history to make these determinations. Now, to get the magic of FSRS to work right, you need to divide your note types up into different presets. This is because Anki can optimize your FSRS settings for every single preset, and in my case, each language has its own preset. Now, you don't really need to know like the technical details behind how FSRS works, right? What you do need to know is that this method will help Anki figure out the cards that are really easy for you, the ones that are really difficult, and the ones that are sort of in between, right? It's going to work with you and your memory to sort of like reflect your memory onto you. It's very, very powerful like this. But it doesn't work if you lie to it. If you're like, I'm just going to mark everything as right so I can feel good, or so I have like a good position on the leaderboard add-on or something like that. You don't want to do that. Don't let your pride get the best of you. You're trying to use this to help you learn the language, not to like show off. Now, remember though that something like FSRS, that's something that none of these paid apps can do. Duolingo doesn't do it, Glossika doesn't do it, Fluenz doesn't do it, Babbel doesn't do it, and whatever else. None of them have this. And the best part is that it's part of Anki, and it's 100% free. Now, if you want, there's other stuff you can get hooked up that I use a lot, stuff like HyperTTS that gives you high-quality AI voices for sentences, phrases, and words. However, you always want to prioritize native speaker audio. That means you need to check sites like Forvo first for your favorite word or phrase. A secret many people don't know is that the dictionary over at Korean Class 101 lets you get excellent quality audio for free, provided that you have a way to download these sound files, hint hint. Remember though that the gold standard is always authentic sentences that come from native speakers speaking at a native pace. This is the sort of thing that AI simply cannot emulate. So, when it comes to language learning, the thing you've got to remember more than anything else is that learning a language is not about like passing a level on Duolingo. It's not about getting to the next textbook. It's not about having 10,000 Anki cards or 100,000 Anki cards. Not that I would know anything about that, right? It's not about any of that sort of stuff, right? You can learn languages without any of that. I've done it. In fact, I've done it more than once, right? The thing that will help you more than anything else is the one thing that we're all very, very scared of. That would be actually speaking the language with native speakers of the language. Of course, this is easiest if you're living in the country or if you happen to be married to a native speaker. But if not, you can always find a native speaking tutor using one of these online services. There are a couple of services that offer this, and honestly, I don't really know if one is better than the other. And if you don't trust the more generic services, you can also usually find ones tailored for your individual language. Honestly, the gold standard, more than anything else, is having a private tutor to speak with you in the language, especially one who is not scared to say, you said that wrong, who's not going to just like pass over and be like, whatever, who's going to stop you and say, okay, this is what's going on. Or maybe after you're done talking with them, they stop you and rehash and say you did this and that and this and that wrong. Whatever it is you prefer, talk with your tutor, right? Now, that's the best thing you can do if you can afford it, of course. So, back in the old days, when we were in Shenyang, China, about 15 years ago, I had a native speaker of Korean tutor me for 4 hours every weekend, right? 2 hours Saturday, 2 hours Sunday. This made a huge difference to me for my comprehension level and for my confidence in speaking. So if you can't afford it, right, there are things you can do. You can try to use TV shows. You can try to use like podcasts or whatever to at least get a feel for the sound of the language, and then have friends who speak it or something and go talk with them if possible. But if you're going to pay anyway, like if you're going to pay for one of these apps or whatever, you know, skip the stupid apps. Don't get into the dumb generic language learning services. Don't pay like $150 or whatever it is that Glossika wants. Instead, spend that money on a good quality tutor. It's worth every penny. Anyway, that gives you at least an idea of why I recommend staying away from Duolingo. The games are fun, I suppose, but you're going to have a much better experience if you actually take charge of your own learning. And remember, you want to focus on actually using and learning the language, not on just playing games and passing to the next level or something like that. Anyway, that's my advice. So to rehash this, if you're going to use something like Anki to help you with your memory, which you should, make the deck yourself. Don't download something that somebody else did. You need it to be yours. The more that it belongs to you, the more effective it's going to be. Make sure that you learn the stuff you put in the deck before you put it in there, because you're not going to have time to learn it when the card comes up. You're going to be like, this is stupid, and you're either going to delete it, or the worst thing you can do is push, oh yeah, I've got this, it's easy, and then you're going to screw up your algorithm. Now, if you're going to spend money, spend your money on hiring a native speaking tutor and focus your efforts on them. That's going to be a lot more useful than anything else, and it's definitely going to be more helpful than the AI-backed garbage tier apps that are out there. Anyway, let me know what you guys think in the comments.